And that's weather and traffic together on the 2s.
Well, it's a question that many of us may be asking. Why do some people become overweight and others remain thin, and they eat basically the same thing? We may have a few answers for you. This morning, Gary Taubes, a science journalist and author, joins us live in studio this morning with a look at why we get fat and what we can do about it. That's your book, Why We Get Fat. Good morning, Gary.
Good morning.
Now, Chris Tomer is a big, our weatherman, a big fan of yours. He likes all your science. So give us the basics of why we get fat and what we can do about it.
Well, the basics are this, and this is the point I make in the book. We don't get fat, even though it seems obvious, this idea that we eat too much and we exercise too little. It's actually nonsensical, and I explain that in great depth. And what really happens, this is a theory that pre-World War II Europeans had, and it's almost assuredly true. We get fat because certain foods in our diet dysregulate our fat tissue. They basically make us secrete hormones, insulin in particular, and insulin stores calories as fat. And so some foods are literally fattening, and others aren't. And unfortunately, again, it's an old story. They're the carbohydrates that we eat: the bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, beer. Anything that's sweet, and sodas and fruit juices. And, you know, it's funny, foods that my mother's generation grew up believing were fattening. And if you actually look at the underlying science, the biochemistry and the hormonal regulation of fat tissue, they are fattening.
So what could we eat that would help alleviate this problem?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, you get rid of the base of the food guide pyramid, which is what's making you fat, and you end up eating a lot of you know, green leafy vegetables, and you can eat pulses and you know, beans with the nutritionists call them low glycemic index carbohydrates.
Okay.
And animal products, unfortunately. So this diet tends to be, this way of eating, it tends to be adverse to vegetarians and vegans, because basically the foods with the least carbs in them are eggs and meat and fish and poultry and cheeses.
So is it similar to the Atkins diet?
Well, in effect, it is the Atkins diet, but not everyone needs to be that severe. You know, one of the problem points I'm making in the book is that we give these blanket recommendations for the whole nation, and it's supposedly what's good for lean people is what's good for obese people, and lean people are fundamentally different than people who are predisposed to put on fat. I mean, we know, those of us who put on fat easily know it. And the reason we put on fat easily are the carbs in our diet.
Did you use this at all yourself?
Pardon me?
Have you always been thin, or did you use this
yeah,
science
let's just say
yourself?
I would be a lot heavier.
Yes.
If I didn't eat this way.
Now, if you are a vegetarian or vegan, or you don't eat much meat, what would you replace then for all that protein?
Well, the main thing is you get rid of these fattening carbohydrates. I'm trying to just bring back this old concept of the fattening carbohydrate. So you don't have to have white rice and potatoes. You don't have to drink juices and sodas, beers. These foods are literally fattening, and you can get rid of them and then add, you know, just more of the other foods you're eating. You know, and it's harder to be as lean as you want to be if you're a vegan or a vegetarian.
Yes. But
it doesn't mean you can't be healthier and leaner by getting rid of these fattening carbohydrates.
Okay, so when you started, you're into the science of this. Did you know this before you started doing the study?
No, I didn't know any of this. I started researching this. I was a hardcore science writer. I wrote about high energy physics and nuclear engineering.
Yes.
I got into public health in the early 90s because some of my physics friends said, you should see how bad the science is there. It's fascinating. And I've just been winding my way through it. And for the past 10 years, I've been working on this. And I had the opportunity to do more research probably than anyone alive.
Wow.
And when you do that research, what you find out is that we actually solved the obesity problem in the 1960s.
By cutting out, they said those carbs were fattening.
By establishing, yeah, what regulates our fat tissue. You know, which hormones and enzymes regulate. And when you look at that alone, you realize it's the carbohydrates. But the problem is, people like Atkins read this research and started recommending low-carb diets, which are high in fat. And we came to believe that fat caused heart disease. It doesn't. That science is terrible.
Yeah, I read about that in here. A lot of interesting science in your book, so I appreciate you coming in. It's hard for somebody who likes carbs to read the book, but I'll go ahead and take your word for it. Thank you so much for coming in.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
It's called Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It by Gary Taubes. And it's available now in bookstores. All right, what would you do if, let's say,